The magic carpet slippers. C.K. Kingsmith served in the Grenadier Guards during Second World War, and afterwards spent 20 years a farmer in Gloucestershire, the county of his birth. Many of his stories are inspired by his farming experiences. Later he taught at a village primary school. His first book, The Fox Busters, was published in 1978. And he has written a great number of children's books, including The Sheep Pig, winner of the Guardian Award and filmed as Babe, Harry's Mad, Noah's Brother, The Jehug, Martin's Mice, Ace, The Cuckoo Child and Harriet's R, winner of the Children's Book Award in 1995. At the British Book Awards in 1991 he was voted Children's Author of the Year. He has 3 children, a large number of grandchildren and several great-grandchildren. Books by Dick Kingsmith. Back to Front Benji. Clever Duck, The Fox Busters, George Speaks, The Ghost at Codling Castle and Other Stories, The Hodgehog, The Invisible Dog, The Genius, Julius Caesar Escote, The Magic Carpet Slippers, Martin's Mice, King Max, The Last 4. Chapter 1. The moment he put them on, old Mr. Sloggett felt that his new pair of carpet slippers were different. They didn't look any different, they looked the same kind he always bought, soft and comfy, in a check pattern, blue and white in this case, and with rubbery soles. But the instant he slipped his feet into them, Mr. Sloggett had a strange feeling, a feeling of great power, as though there was nothing that he could not do. Much to Mrs. Sloggett's annoyance, her husband wore slippers for almost the whole of every day. He did not go to bed in them, it must be said, and he took them off to get into the bath, but otherwise he always wore slippers. He wore them around the house, and for messing about in the garden. He wore them for walking down the road to the post box and even into the village. "Why can't you wear shoes like other people?" his wife said, over and over again, and over again, Mr. Sloggett. But carpet slippers are of course not meant for tramping about in, sometimes in the rain, and so, about every 6 months, Mr. Sloggett's would get holes in their soles, and he would have to buy a new pair. Luckily there was a show shop in the village, not a couple of 100 meters from the Sloggett's cottage, and a very strange little shop it was. At the front of it was a bow window, inside which stood a selection of shoes and boots and sandals and trainers and slippers, and beside the bow window was a half door, such as you might find in a horse's stable. The upper half was usually open, and the owner of the shop mostly stood inside, resting his arms on the lower half of the door and looking out into the village street to see the world go by. Above the door was a notice that said shoes, a lot. Over the years Percy Sloggett and Arthur Lott had become good friends. Not only did Mr. Sloggett buy a new pair of carpet slippers there every 6 months or so, but quite often he would potter up the street to have an adder, and to have a look at Mr. Lott's stock of slippers. Each time he had to replace a worn-out pair, he liked to choose slippers of a different color from the old ones. They were always checked, but sometimes they were black and white, sometimes green and white, or brown and white, or red and white, or blue and white. "Morning, Art," Mr. Sloggett had said only a week ago, as he neared the show shop and saw the owner leaning on the lower half of the door and looking out. "Morning, Perce," said Mr. Lott. He looked down at his friend's carpet slippers, red and white ones as it happened. "You after a new pair?" he said. "'Fraid so," said Mr. Sloggett. Come in," said Mr. Lott, and he opened the lower half of the door. Mr. Sloggett sat down on the wooden chair provided for customers, and propped his walking stick against the counter, and took off his left slipper. It had a small hole in the sole. Then he Industrialana took off the right one. It had a big hole. Then he put them on again. "I dunno how they gets like that," he said. It's wear and tear, said Mr. Lot. Wear and tear, the missus is always on at me to get shoes, Art, said Mr. Sloggett, but I likes me carpet slippers. So you do, Purse, said Mr. Lot. So you do, TL have a different color this time, Art, said Mr. Sloggett. What do you fancy, blue and white, please, size 10-ish, I knows that, Purse, said Mr. Lot. I knows that. He reached up to a shelf behind the counter and began to take down a number of cardboard boxes. He opened them one at a time. Got a blue and white and a 9, he said, but no 10s, I'm afraid, no 10s in blue and white. Oh dear, said Mr. Sloggett. I fancied blue this time. Must be going on 3 years since I had blue. Ah, now wait a minute, Purse, said Mr. Lot, taking down one more box. There's this pair, D forgotten, but I don't really like to sell them to you. Why not she price the price? Mr. Sloggett looked surprised. One thing you could always be sure of with Lot's footwear, everything was amazingly cheap. In town carpet slippers were 8 British pounds a pair. Here they were 3 British pounds and 50 pence. It was the same with all Arthur Lot stock, shoes, boots, sandals, trainers, slippers. They were wonderful value. £3.50 you usually charge me, Art, he said. I know, said Mr. Lot. I know, that's what's worrying me. These are only £2.50. He held up what looked to Mr. Sloggett like a perfectly ordinary pair of checked blue and white carpet slippers. I don't know where they've come from, he said. Don't want you wearing them out even quicker than you usually do. Mr. Sloggett kicked off his old slippers. Let's try 'em, he said, and then when he did, he immediately felt this strange powerful feeling. He stood up. And only £2.50, he said. That's right, it's a deal, Art, he said, and he held out a hand, saying, shake on it. As he shook his friend's hand, Mr. Lot's features suddenly contorted in pain and he gave a loud cry. Let go of me, Percy begged. Let go, you'll break every bone in me hand. Sorry, Art, said Mr. Sloggett. Mr. Lot fell to his knees, nursing his right hand with his left. Oh my word, he said. Oh my word, I felt like I was being crushed in a vice. I got no idea you was so terribly strong. Whatever come over you? Bisim for SYAIS gain C.H.S. Chapter. Whoa, it's a funny thing, said Mr. Sloggett to himself as he walked home in his brand new blue and white carpet slippers. But I feel as fit as a flea. 75 years old I may be, but I feel more like 25. Dunno what I'm doing with this walking stick. Why, I could jump clear across the road onto t'other pavement if I tried. I bet I could. He looked up and down to see if there was any traffic coming. There wasn't. He looked up and down again to see if there were any people about. There weren't. He wriggled his toes inside the new slippers, and then he bent his knees and leaped right across the 10-meter breadth of the village street, and landed on the opposite pavement, light as a feather. Old Mr. Sloggett looked down at the new carpet slippers on his feet. It's got to be you, he said. He looked up and down again and still there was no traffic and nobody about, so he took off the slippers. Holding them in one hand and his walking stick in the other, he bent his knees and leaped back in the opposite direction. He landed in the gutter, a meter away, in his stocking feet, feeling at least 75 years old and rather foolish. It too is true, he said to the slippers, as he put them on again. Once more he experienced that wonderful warm sensation of strength and energy which seemed to rush up his body, from the soles of his feet to the top of his bald head. Mr. Sloggett gave a little hop of pleasure. At least he meant it to be a little hop, but actually he rose a couple of meters into the air. Long jump, high jump, he said to himself. And I bet I could run like a stag. Why, I could win all the gold medals at the Olympic Games. Whatever will the missus think? Common I pan aces e CSCIOPTL $sign section, SAS L1 IZIA 4, PAS by equals Y teen, say that as he turned in at his garden gate, Mr. Sloggett told himself that he wouldn't tell the missus, not yet anyway. Mrs. Sloggett was hanging out washing on the line. Where you been, she said. Up to Arts, he replied. In your old slippers, I suppose. I goes up in me old ones. I comes back in me new ones. You're the limit, you are, Percy Sloggett, his wife said, wandering round the village in carpet slippers. Whatever will people think? And you're forever buying new ones. These ones are different, said Mr. Sloggett. He went into the cottage, and sat down in his armchair by the fire, and took his walking stick made of stout ash in both hands. Shan't want you no more, he said, and he snapped it into as easy as winking. Chun he snapped the 2 pieces into 4, and the 4 in half again, and chucked the 8 bits onto the fire. He sat for a moment watching the bits of stick burn, and then he took off his new slippers again and stretched out his legs to warm the soles of his feet. Once slipperless, he immediately felt different, not exactly tired but just a bit lazy, a bit can't be bothered. He felt in fact like his usual old self who often took a little nap at this time of the day, and he closed his eyes and slept. When he woke, it was to find his wife standing beside his chair, holding the new slippers. Here, he said, give them here. Mrs. Sloggett waved the slippers at him. 50 year we been married, Percy Sloggett, she said, and for most of they 50 year you been wearing carpet slippers. I wasn't so bad afore you retired, you had to wear shoes to work, but these last 10 years it's been slippers, 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 day in, day out, inside or outside, come wind, come weather, till I'm sick to death of the sight of the dratted things. Angrily she waved the new blue and white slippers again. "T'ver a good mind," she said, "to chuck these on the fire." "No, no," cried Mr. Sloggett, struggling to his stocking feet. "Don't do that, our Mary Ann, not these ones. What's special about these ones?" said his wife. "You'd always buy the same sort," she sighed. "If I did burn 'em, you'd go back up to Arthur Lots, I suppose, and buy another pair just the same," and with a snort of disgust, she dropped the slippers on the floor. Mr. Sloggett picked them up. "Oh dear," he said to them, "that were a narrow escape." He switched on the television and sat down again in his chair. It was a quiz show, where contestants have to give the correct answers to all sorts of questions. If they do, they win a prize, sometimes a very handsome prize like a brand new car. Mr. Sloggett watched for a moment, slippers in hand. "FF didn't know that," he said, "and I didn't know that, and well, I never knew that." Absently, still watching the screen, he pulled on his slippers. "Now then," said the quizmaster to the last surviving contestant, "we come to the final question. Answer it correctly and the star prize, this magnificent 3-liter supercharged Maserelli sports car, is yours." The camera lingered on the gleaming silver machine. "The final question," went on the quizmaster, "or, I suppose, to be fair, I should say the final 6 questions. You have exactly 60 seconds to tell me the names of the 6 wives of King Henry. The 8th in the correct order. Start the clock." Before the contestant could gather his wits to say anything, Mr. Sloggett put his hand up as though he were a child in class answering the teacher and shouted excitedly, "Catherine of Aragon, and Boleyn, Jane Seymour, and of Cleves, Catherine Howard." Catherine Parr. Before the clock had reached 10 seconds, He sat watching while the final contestant made a mess of this final question and had to be content with the dishwasher instead of the car, and all the time he was thinking, how did I do that? I do remember the old chap had 6 wives, but I never had no idea who they were. Then it dawned on him that the magic carpet slippers not only affected his body but also his brain. He switched off the set. Mrs. Sloggett looked round the door. What was you yelling about? She said. I was watching one of the quiz programs, said Mr. Sloggett. They ain't easy, they are. I could win one of they, any day, you said Mrs. Sloggett scornfully. Every day you try to do the crossword in the newspaper and you never fill in more than a couple of clues. And it's the easy crossword too. When she had gone away again, Mr. Sloggett fetched that day's paper and a pen. He completed the easy crossword as quickly as he could write in the answers, one and about 5 minutes, in fact. Then he turned to the larger, more difficult crossword. He finished it in a quarter of an hour. Then he sat back in his armchair, grinning. Percy Sloggett, he said happily, you bain't just a pretty face. Chapter 3. Mr. Sloggett did a good deal of thinking before he went to bed that night. Thinking was something he had not been used to doing much of, preferring to drift along down the river of life, letting the current take him where it would. But now, with the magic carpet slippers on his feet, thought was a very different business. I'm a very different person, that's plain, he said to himself, in body and in mind. There's no limit to what I might do with this here secret power, but one thing's sure, it must stay a secret. So, even though his wife seldom bothered with the daily paper, he tore out the pages that carried the completed crosswords and scrumpled them up and tossed them on the fire. Doing this reminded him of the narrow escape the slippers had had at the hands of Mrs. Sloggett. Was it possible that she would do such a thing in the future if she got hold of them again? Should he keep them on in bed? Better not, she'd make an awful fuss. In the end he delayed coming up to bed till his wife was asleep, and then he put the slippers under his pillow. Then he put his head on it and drifted off into dreamland. I know that old King had 6 wives, was his last thought, but I got no idea what they was called. When he woke next morning, Mr. Sloggett lay pretending to be still asleep, until his wife had got up and dressed and gone downstairs. Then he threw back the covers and swung his legs over the side of the bed and pulled the new slippers from under the pillow. He held them a moment and tried again to remember the names of Henry Vidite's wives. Not a clue. He put them on his feet and immediately the 6 names tripped off his tongue in the correct order. You'd never believe it, he said to himself, and all for £2.50, but then it suddenly struck him that the life of each pair of his slippers was always a short one, 6 months at most, and sometimes a good bit less. How could he preserve these ones from wearing out? By not wearing them, of course, or only very seldom. Should he buy another pair of slippers from Mart, to wear most of the time? No, blow that, said Mr. Sloggett. Let's have fun with these while they last. You never know, they might last for ages. Being magic ones, last longer than me perhaps. I bain't no spring chicken. At breakfast, Mrs. Sloggett looked up at the calendar that hung on the wall behind her husband. 30th of October already, she said. Afore you can look round it'll be Christmas. Mr. Sloggett did not look up from his cornflakes. 56 days, he said. 56 days to Christmas. You done that quick, said Mrs. Sloggett. 'Tis easy. 2 more of October, 30 of November, and 24 out of December. Any fool could do that, so it seems, said Mrs. Sloggett. Next thing you'll be telling me how many hours it was. 1,344, said Mr. Sloggett. He looked at his watch. Mine is 9, he said, because it's already 9 o'clock this morning. So 'tis only 1,335 hours to Christmas. Or 80,340 minutes, or 4,820,400 seconds. Mrs. Sloggett laughed scornfully. Don't be so daft, Percy, she said. Making up all the figures. After breakfast Mr. Sloggett walked up the street to Arthur Lott's shop, and as he did so, a thought struck him. The blue and white slippers on his feet were magic ones. He was in no doubt at all about that. But were they only magic for him? Would they work for someone else? For Art, for example? Oh, I hope not, he said to himself, but there's only one way to find out. Arthur Lott was leaning on his half-star as usual. Shoes, molle fl Arta. ZJ morning, Perce, he said. Come on in. How's the new slippers? Brilliant, said Mr. Sloggett. You got any more like that? Art? No, said Mr. Lott. Just an odd pair. They are, thought Mr. Sloggett. See any telly last night? Artie asked. A bit. See that quiz program I did? Shouldn't have minded winning that car. I shouldn't. Better nor our old Ford. You'd have known the answer to that last question, would you? The names of Henry VIII's 6 wives. Bless you. No, said Mr. Lott. Never got on with history at school, but you must have heard the chap. Read out the right names in the right order. Never listen, so you don't know. None of them. Haven't got no idea. There was a short silence, and then Mr. Sloggett said, What size do you take? Art? Same as you, Perce. 10s. Like to try these slippers on. Whatever for them. Ever so comfy. Best pair I've ever had. Go on, try 'em. Oh, all right then, said Mr. Lott. If I must. And he took off his shoes. Hope nobody comes in the shop, he said. I shall feel daft. As soon as Mr. Sloggett had taken off his slippers, he found, once again, that the names of the king's wives had completely escaped from his memory. But oh, he thought, how I hopes that Art doesn't know them now that he's wearing the slippers. Did you mean what you said? Artie asked. When I said what, that you didn't know the answers to that question about Henry VIII, course I meant it, and you still don't know. Now course I don't, said Mr. Lott. Look, Perce, I never even knew the old fellow had 6. One's too much for me sometimes. Here, have your precious slippers back. Mr. and Mrs. Sloggett had never had any children. Mr. and Mrs. Lott, on the other hand, not only had a son but also a granddaughter who quite often came to stay with them. She was a happy kind of child with curly red hair whose name was really Laura, but ever since she was quite small she had always been called Lolly, and ever since she was quite small she had known her grandfather's friend Mr. Sloggett, whom she called Uncle Percy. Percy Sloggett never said as much to anyone, not even to his wife, but he would dearly have loved a grandchild of his own, preferably a little girl with curly red hair, exactly like Lolly Lott. Whenever she came to stay with her grandparents above the show shop, Mr. Sloggett dropped in rather more often than usual, and the same conversation took place each time. Morning, Art, Mr. Sloggett would say. Morning, Perce, and morning, Lolly. Morning, Uncle Percy. I don't suppose Lolly would like to come along o' me to the sweet shop next door, would she? Art? I don't suppose she would. Perce? I would. Grandad? I would. Uncle Percy. Lolly would cry, and off they'd go, the tall bald old man and the small red-haired girl. You spoil her worse than I do, Perce, Mr. Lott would say when they returned. It's only just this once, Art. A likely story, Perce. I say, a likely story. And sure enough, if Lolly stayed for a week, Uncle Percy would drop into the show shop 6 times. He didn't come on a Sunday, of course. The shop was shut, and he never stayed too long, but Lollilot's visits came to mean a great deal to him. Not long after he had bought the magic carpet slippers, she came to stay with her grandparents. Soon, to nobody's surprise, Mr. Sloggett turned up at the show shop. It was while he was buying sweets for Lolly that a happy thought struck him. Having firmly decided to keep the magic of the carpet slippers a secret from his wife, from Arthur Lot, from anyone, he now suddenly realized that in fact he did very much want to tell someone. Who better to tell than a child? For children, very sensibly, believe in magic. What better child to tell than Lollilot? So as they walked the few meters back from sweet shop to show shop, Mr. Sloggett stopped, and, pointing down, said, "What have I got on my feet?" "Lolly spurs, Uncle Percy," said Lolly. "You always wear slippers." "Yes, but these are different. They look new." "So they are, but that's not what makes 'em different." "Now then, can you keep a secret?" Lolly took a bite from her chocolate bar. "Yes," she said. "You must promise not to tell anyone, not your dad nor your mom nor your granddad nor your grandma nor none of your friends neither. This is just between you and me, understand?" Lolly took another bite. "Yes," she said. "Promise?" "Yes, Uncle Percy, I promise." "Right then," said Mr. Sloggett, and he pointed down once again. "These here carpet slippers," he said, "are magic ones. When I'm wearing them, there's nothing I don't know and nothing I can't your." "Show me," said Lolly. "All right, what you want me to do?" "Fly," said Lolly. "Fly?" "Yes, fly, like a bird." "Don't be silly, Lolly, I can't do that. You said there was nothing you couldn't do, nothing that ordinary folk can do." "But flying, why, no one can do that." "All right," said Lolly. "Well then, stand on your head. Anyone can do that." Said Mr. Sloggett. "Tell the truth, I bain't too sure how to go about that." Lolly finished her chocolate bar. "You kneel down," she said, "and you put the top of your head down on the ground and your hands flat on the ground either side of your head, and you kick your legs straight up in the air." Mr. Sloggett wiggled his toes inside his magic carpet slippers. "Come on, Percy," he said to himself, "you can do it." He knelt down and put the top of his head down onto the pavement and his hands flat on either side and kicked up his legs and straightened them. "This what you mean?" he asked. "Upside down." "That's brilliant, Uncle Percy," said Lolly. "Chat's magic, that is," and she stood on her head beside him. At which moment Arthur Lot poked his head out over the half door of the show shop, to see his granddaughter Lolly and his old friend Percy Sloggett standing on their heads on the pavement, one on her red curls, one on his bald noddle. Chapter 5. Mr. Lot came out of his shop and bent down and peered into Mr. Sloggett's upside-down face. "I never knew you could do that, Perce," he said. "I say, I never knew you could do that." "No more did I," thought Mr. Sloggett. "There's always a first time," he said. He let his legs come down again until he was once more standing on the pavement in his carpet slippers. Beside him, Lolly did the same. "Uncle Percy's clever, isn't he, Grandad?" she said. "I should say so," said Mr. Lot. "What else can you do, Perce?" "Anything," thought Mr. Sloggett, "so long as I'm wearing these here slippers, except fly." "Oh, I don't know," he said. "I'll tell you something, Lolly," said her grandfather. "Uncle Percy's ever so strong. Why, only the other day we shook hands and he near broke every bone in mine." "You mind you don't ever go shaking hands with him. 'T wouldn't hurt Lolly, Art, you knows that," said Mr. Sloggett. "Well, you hurt me." "Didn't know my own strength," said Mr. Sloggett truthfully. Just then a customer went into the show shop and Mr. Lot hurried back inside. "Was that really the first time you ever stood on your head?" Uncle Percy said Lolly. Mr. Sloggett nodded. And are you really, really strong too? Like Grandad, said Mr. Sloggett nodded again. There was a car parked beside the curb, and he took hold of the back of it and lifted the rear wheels right up off the ground. Wow, said Lolly. It's these here slippers that does it. Like I told you, said Mr. Sloggett. She makes me clever too. Ask me a question, Lolly, any question. I'll bet I can answer it. Lolly thought for a bit. Then she said, how high is Mount Everest? 8,848 meters, said Mr. Sloggett. Or, if you prefer, 29,028 feet. Ask me another. What are the names of the Prince of Wales, Charles, Philip, Arthur, George? Well, here's one you won't know, Uncle Percy, said Lolly. What are the names of the Spice Girls? Posh, Baby, Sporty, Scary. Ginger has left, of course. Wow, said Lolly. She looked down at Mr. Sloggett's slippers. Would they work for me if I put them on? She asked. No, they only work for me. You're lucky, you are, said Lolly, being so strong and so clever too. Fancy you knowing the names of the Spice Girls. I suppose you know the names of the brothers in Oasis too. Course I do, said Mr. Sloggett. There's Liam Gallagher and Noel Gallagher. Lolly shook her red curls in wonderment. Wowee, she cried. Back home again. Mr. Sloggett sat down in his armchair and took off his slippers to toast his toes. In the kitchen, Mrs. Sloggett had the radio on, rather loud. Some kind of music boomed out. Mrs. Sloggett came in. Oh, you're back, she said. What, said her husband. Can't hear you with that racket going on. What is it anyway? Who won us at making all that row calls themselves Oasis, said his wife. Oasis, said Mr. Sloggett. Never heard of them. By Mia on Anal. Chapter 6. Mr. and Mrs. Sloggett's 50 years of married life had, though childless, been on the whole a happy time. Not that a fly on the wall would always have thought so, for often they would snap at one another in what might have sounded quite an angry way. His little spats might be about a variety of things, the commonest being that, in Mr. Sloggett's opinion, his wife always had the radio on much too loud. She was a trifle deaf, and, in Mrs. Sloggett's view, that her husband would wear slippers. But neither ever bore lasting grudges, and never had they got to sleep at night still on bad terms. They did not tell each other so, but each was in fact very fond of the other. During that November, Mr. Sloggett began to think hard about what to give his wife as a Christmas present. Christmas had always been very important to Mary Ann Sloggett, and her husband had always tried to choose something nice as a gift. But of course they were not well off, and the things he could afford were very modest. Now surely, with the aid of the magic, able to surprise her with a really special present. So far he had used the magic quite sparingly. It was nice, of course, to be able always to complete the harder crossword in the newspaper. The easy one was now too simple to bother with. He did not write in the answers but solved the whole thing in his head. Likewise, if there was a quiz, general knowledge or any specialist subject, on telly, he would answer all the questions correctly but never speak the answers aloud. At times too he used the physical powers that the slippers gave him. For example, one evening after dark he was in a hurry to catch the last post, and he ran down the road to the pillar box at a speed that an Olympic athlete would have envied. On another occasion, he decided to chop down an old tree in the hedge at the bottom of the cottage garden. It was quite a big tree, with a trunk as O4 thick round as a telegraph post, that Mr. Sloggett and his slippers gave one swing of his axe and sliced through it as though it had been a stick of rhubarb. In the matter of Mrs. Sloggett's Christmas present, however, it wasn't his strength he was planning to use but his brains. What should he get her? It must be something she'd always wanted but never been able to have because of the cost. December came and Mr. Sloggett had still not decided what to do, when one day fate decreed that he should notice an advertisement in his daily paper. He had kicked off his slippers to warm his feet, and thus become his old slow-thinking self as he read this advertisement, which was for a washing machine. Sent magically an S4 new luxury model washer-dryer XF large capacity KO latest modifications installation free, yours for only £999.99 British pounds for K40 while Mr. Sloggett sat by the fire in a doze. Then, his feet warm, he pulled on his slippers again. The paper on his lap was still open at the same place, but now the words of the advertisement simply leapt out of the page at him. A washing machine, he thought. Just what Mary Ann's always wanted. All these years she's been washing our clothes in the old copper and scrubbing Simsita Aglet, aim, 0, them on the old washing board and putting them through the old mangle and carrying them out to the line and pegging them up. Now, if only I could get her this here machine for Christmas, but how could I afford it? He turned the page, and there, to his amazement, was the answer. This week's Do You Know competition. Here are 3 questions. Answer each correctly, and you could win £1,000 British pounds. £1,000, thought Mr. Sloggett. I could get the washing machine and a penny change too. He read on 1. Is Big Ben a Tower B, a Bell C, a Click? 2. Elvis Presley's house is called a Brooklands B, Shadowlands C, Gracelands 3. Which of these birds can fly backwards? A. The secretary bird B, the hummingbird C, the mockingbird. Easy as falling off a log, said Mr. Sloggett to himself, and he wrote on the coupon 1BEAE2S, B, and filled in his name and address and put it in an envelope and stamped it. Just going up to post, he called to his wife. In your carpet slippers, I suppose, said Mrs. Sloggett. Course, who are you writing to doing a competition? Out of the newspaper. Competition? You couldn't never win 10 feet they. You might be surprised, said Mr. Sloggett. Pity you got nothing better to do, said Mrs. Sloggett. Me, I got a great pile of washing to get through. I wish to goodness I had one of they washing machines. Perhaps Father Christmas will bring you one, said Mr. Sloggett to himself, as he made his slippered way to the post box. Why on 3AAYG go AJ? Chapter 7. It can only have been luck, nothing to do with the magic carpet slippers but luck, pure and simple. Quite a large number of people who entered the Do You Know competition gave the correct 3 answers. That Mr. Sloggett's envelope was the first to be opened and thus he was adjudged the winner. And it can only have been luck that the makers of the new luxury Magiclean washing machine with tumble dryer should arrange to have it delivered and installed in the week before Christmas, when Mrs. Sloggett happened to be away. Her sister had been poorly and she had got to look after her for a few days. When she returned home, on Christmas Eve, the third stroke of luck decreed that she should have no need to go out to the wash house at the back of the cottage that evening. So that on the morning of Christmas Day Mr. Sloggett was able to take his wife by the hand and say, I got something to show you, Mary Ann, so shut your eyes and don't open 'em till I says so. Then he led her out to the wash house and said, Right, you can look now. Mrs. Sloggett opened her eyes an ordinary amount and then she opened them very wide indeed. Perry see a crick to it ever? Happy Christmas, said Mr. Sloggett, and many happy wash days. However, gasped Mrs. Sloggett. I won it, said her husband. That competition I done. You said I wouldn't never win one o' they, but I did. Oh, Percy, said Mrs. Sloggett, and then, after she had given him a big hug, she rushed off straight away to get some dirty clothes and made him show her how to work it. which the Magiclian people had shown him. The washing machine washed and then the tumble dryer tumbled and dried, and altogether it was a very happy Christmas. For a little while after that, Mr. Sloggett didn't make much use of the slipper's magic properties. He solved his crossword, to be sure, and got all the answers right in television quizzes, and occasionally ran very fast or jumped very high or lifted enormous heavy weights when no one was looking. But though he didn't actually use the power of the slippers for a particular purpose, he thought very seriously about the whole business. I could go in for lots of competitions, he thought, and maybe win even bigger prizes. Like a car, say, but then that wouldn't be no good. I can't drive, so I don't want one. Now Mary Ann, she wanted a washing machine, and now she's as happy as a dog with two tails. But me, I'm contented as I am. There's nothing much I need. All I want is for these here carpet slippers to last forever. Sitting in his armchair by the fire, he took off the slippers, feeling immediately just a bit lazy, a bit can't bothered, as usual, and examined them. Not surprisingly, they looked a bit worn. Hay had been worn, all the time, during the 3 months or so of their life so far, and the rubber soles were beginning to look a bit thin. Slipperless, Mr. Sloggett didn't really care all that much. Another 3 months, he thought, and they'll probably be wore out. So what? He pulled them on again. Slippered now, experiencing the usual strange feeling of power, he answered himself, so de better get a move on and think of something to use them for. But what? I can't ask Mary Ann, nor Art Lot, nor anyone. They don't know about them. Wait a minute though, one person does. Lolly, I'll ask her. Mr. Sloggett jumped out of his armchair and strode purposefully out of the room, remembering to slow down. To his usual amble as he passed through the kitchen. Where are you going? Said Mrs. Sloggett. Up the village, in those old slippers, I suppose. Yes. Going to see Art. Buy some new ones, I suppose. No, said Mr. Sloggett. He's have got years of wearing them yet, or months anyway, I hopes, he thought, as he walked with long strong strides up the road. Arthur Lot was leaning on his house door, looking out, as usual. Arternoon, Perce, he called, I got a friend of yours here, and he opened the half door and stood aside, and out came Lot. Hello, Uncle Percy, she said. Well, said Mr. Sloggett, fancy you being here, Lolly. There's something I want to ask you, and I know what it was, Perce, said Mr. Lot. Would she like to go along to the sweet shop? Am I right? Well, yes, you're right, said Mr. Sloggett. Just so happens there's something I want to ask you, Perce, said Mr. Lot. If you've got a bit of time to spare, long as you like, Art. Well, I promised to take Lolly down to the village playground. The missus looked after the shop, but she's had to go out. So I wonder, would you like to take Lolly down there? Course I will, said Mr. Sloggett. Lolly grinned. After we'd been to the sweet shop. Uncle Percy, she said, so it came about, pure luck, nothing to do with the slippers, that Mr. Sloggett had quite a nice long time alone with his red-headed young friend, as she swung on the swings and slid down the slides and bounced on the bouncy castle. Out of breath at last, she sat on a bench beside her bald-headed old friend. Lolly, said Mr. Sloggett, you know these magic slippers of mine. I told you about them, remember? Yes, Uncle Perry. You haven't told nobody about them, have you? No, Uncle Percy. Well, since I saw you last, I used them to get all the answers right in a Liat Oat competition, and when it won a new washing machine for Mrs. Sloggett. Wow, said Lolly, but I don't know what to use them for next. There's nothing I particularly want for myself, and I got no children. Nor grandchildren, though I'll tell you summit, lolly, if you were my granddaughter instead of ours, I'd use them to get you a really nice present. Come to think of it, why shouldn't I get you a present anyway? Would you like that? I would, Uncle Percy, said Lolly Lot. Is there something you'd really like? Asked Mr. Sloggett. Anything, doesn't matter what it costs. A bike perhaps. I've got one. A watch TV. Got one, said Lolly. But I'll tell you what I'd really like to have, Uncle Percy. What? A pair of magic carpet slippers, like yours. ZMMCOES Chapter 8. Oh, I don't know about that, Lolly love, said Mr. Sloggett. I don't know if there are any other magic ones in the world bar mine. Well, could I try yours on, Uncle Percy, just to see what happens? Nothing will, said Mr. Sloggett. I got your granddad to wear 'em and they didn't do nothing for him. They only works for me. Can't I try? Oh, all right, said Mr. Sloggett. Take your shoes off then. And he took off his slippers and Molly shoved her small feet into them. Feel any different, do you? Asked Mr. Sloggett. How do you mean? Well, powerful like, as though you could answer the hardest question or jump right over my head. No, said Lolly. Ask me a hard question, but of course Mr. Sloggett with his slippers off couldn't think of one. Try jumping, said Lolly, and she got off the bench and bent her knees and jumped upwards as high as she could. But it was only an ordinary sort of a jump, and all that happened was that the slippers fell off. Lolly shook her red head, grinning. You're right, she said. He won't work for me. Put them on again, Uncle Percy, and show me what they do for you. So Mr. Sloggett put on his magic slippers again, feeling at once that thrill of power, and looked around the playground to see if anyone was watching. But there was no one else about, so he sat on one of the swings and said, "Watch this." Then he began to swing himself, higher and higher and higher, until the swing swung right round over the top of its frame. Lolly watched delightedly as Uncle Percy whizzed up and over and down and up and over and down, faster and faster, spinning round and round like a Catherine wheel. Wow! Cried Lolly when at last the swinger came to a halt. That was mega, Uncle Percy. I wish Grandad and Grandma could have seen you. You're not to tell them, mind, said Mr. Sloggett. Oh, no, right then, we'd best be getting back. And you have another think about a present, but don't tell them about that either. Whatever I do for you, it'll just be a secret between you and me, okay, Lolly? Okay, Uncle Percy, said Lolly Lot as they left the village playground. Little did she dream that, not 5 minutes later, her friend would, thanks to the power of his magic carpet slippers, give her the greatest present of all, her life. It happened after they had rounded a corner in the village street and had come to a spot directly opposite that old familiar shop above whose door was a notice that said, "Shoes, a lot. Hold my hand while we cross the road," said Mr. Sloggett to Lolly, but at that moment, before she could obey, Arthur Lot looked out and waved and called, "Hello, Lolly." "Hello, Grandad," cried Lolly, and without thinking, without looking to left or to right, she ran across the road towards her grandfather. At that precise instant a car swung round the corner, a car that was traveling much too fast, a car that had no hope, it seemed, of missing the small red-headed girl in the middle of the road. Afterwards, Mr. Lot could never really recall what happened. He remembered shouting, "Look out!" He remembered the squealing of brakes, he remembered the side of the car swerving and skidding and the dull sound of an impact. And he remembered especially the overwhelming sense of relief as his granddaughter stumbled and tumbled onto the pavement right in front of the show shop and got to her feet and rushed into his arms, unhurt. But the man who had saved her life, the man who, with one incredible lightning leap, which Mr. Lot did not see but which must have measured the best part of 10 meters, had pushed her out of the way of the car, was hurt. For there in the road lay the tall bald-headed carpet-slippered figure of Percy Sloggett. Chapter 9. After the ambulance had come and gone, the police who were questioning the car driver were puzzled by his version of what had happened. In his shock he had freely admitted that he'd been driving much too fast, that it was all his fault, that he deserved whatever punishment he should get. But he also swore blind that the man who had been hurt had saved the child by an enormous leap such as no ordinary human being could possibly make, let alone an old chap like him, said the driver. I never saw anything like it. Talk about the world-long jump record, why, he'd have smashed that easy, it'll you. He flew through the air like a bird after that. They breathalyzed the man, of course, confident that he must be well over the limit, but he was quite sober. As for Mr. Sloggett, he was reasonably lucky, ordinary luck, nothing to do with the slippers, in that, instead of being killed, he simply broke both legs. Nice clean breaks, said the sergeant cheerfully to Mrs. Sloggett when her husband had come round from the operation. We'll soon have him on his feet again, in your slippers as usual, I suppose, said Mrs. Sloggett when the sergeant had gone. What in the world were you up to, Percy, anyway, chap of your age trying to play the hero? Who do you think you are, Superman? She's all right, is she? Marion, said her husband. Lolly Lot, I mean, silly child, said Mrs. Sloggett, running over the road. LKE that without looking. They told me, the Lots did, they're ever so grateful to you, they are, not surprising, they'll be coming in to see you, soon as they're let. Now, you get some sleep, Percy. PM taking all your clothes back home to put in my washing machine. Not my slippers, said Mr. Sloggett. Don't take them, you and your precious slippers, said Mrs. Sloggett. What good are they to you when both your feet are in plaster? But all the same she left them behind. Next morning the Lots and Molly came into hospital to visit. The grandparents could not thank Mr. Sloggett enough. If it hadn't been for you, said Mrs. Lot, and then stopped, unable to continue. It was all my fault, Uncle Percy, said Lolly. If I hadn't run across the road IQ30E, don't you fret, Lolly, said Mr. Sloggett. My legs will soon mend, and then the next time you come to stay with your granddad and grandma, perhaps we'll go down to the playground again. Lolly grinned. And have a swing, she said. I just don't know how you were quick enough to shove her out of the way, Perce, said Mr. Lot. You must have moved like greased lightning. He looked at the pair of size 10 checked blue and white carpet slippers that stood on top of Mr. Sloggett's bedside cupboard. And wearing them things too, he said, as per usual. Mr. Sloggett caught Lolly's eye and winked. Can't wear them at present, he said, pointing at his plastered feet. Tell you one thing, Perce, said Arthur Lot, you're never going to have to pay for another pair of carpet slippers in my shop. You'll get them for nothing. For the rest of your natural, perhaps these ones will last Uncle Percy forever, Granddad, Lolly said. Her grandfather picked the slippers off the cupboard and inspected them. Mr. Sloggett's landing at speed from that life-saving leap had done the soles no good at all. Their fare wore out, said Mr. Lot. After the Lots had gone, Percy Sloggett lay trying to recall that feeling, a power of mind and power of body, which surged through him each time he put on his magic carpet slippers, but he could not recapture it. Doesn't matter, he thought to himself in that lazy can't-be-bothered way. I might be better off without them. All they've brought me is 2 broken legs. Who knows, next time I might break my neck. He took the slippers off the cupboard and held them up before his face, one in each hand. Scuffed and threadbare and dirty they were from the everyday use they'd had, and, turning them over, he saw that each had more holes than sole. "That's right," he said to them softly, "your life is over, but what you'll never know one is that you saved a life. Not me, 'twasn't me, 'twas you us saved the life of little Lollylot." When his wife was leaving after visiting him that evening, he said to her, "Take these slippers with you, Mary Ann, and chuck them on the fire." "On the fire," said Mrs. Sloggett. "Why, you made an awful fuss once when I said I was going to do that." "You feeling all right, Percy?" "Yes," said Mr. Sloggett, "I'm all right, and by the way, Art says I needn't never pay for carpet slippers from now on, so you might go up to the shop and choose me a new pair, ready for when I gets all this plaster off. I think I fancy green and white check ones this time." Mrs. Sloggett sighed, shaking her head. "I don't know," she thought, "him and his carpet slippers, they're all the same, anyway. I'll go and ask the nurse for a carrier bag to put them in," she said. "Don't want to be seen carrying such scruffy old things." When she had gone, Mr. Sloggett put a hand inside each slipper and gently patted the worn soles together in a clapping motion. "Well done," he said. "I shan't forget you, no matter how many more pairs I gets through before I kicks the bucket. There'll never be another pair of magic carpet slippers."